Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for tonight's panel discussion on career and technical education in New York City schools, a critical need for our students and our city's economy. My name is Nick Chapman and I will be tonight's moderator, and we're very excited for this discussion this evening. We have a wonderful panel of experts and government officials who are going to lend some expertise and insights into the opportunities and challenges of career and technical education. Before we begin, I'd like to express a few thank yous to the folks that helped to make this evening's event possible. First, to the New York City Bar Association, which is hosting this evening's event, particularly the Education and Law Committee, which has done a tireless effort to put together tonight's panel, especially Ms. Patricia Del Toro Heck and Leslie Paletti. I'd also like to thank the three co-sponsoring committees, the Labor and Employment Law, Children in the Law, and Council on Children. We'd also like to thank the Bar Association staff who have been an immense help in putting together the panel this evening. Christine Suarez for program planning, Eli Cohen and Nick Colasanti for communications and marketing, and thank you to Kevin Maghayap for his technology support. Once again, my name is Nick Chapman, and I'm the president of Virtual Enterprises International, a nonprofit intermediary working with high schools and middle schools throughout New York City and across the country, preparing students for careers in business, as well as helping students to understand how to develop business ventures and an entrepreneurial mindset to help them develop and leverage the technical skills they're learning across the CTE spectrum. I hope to bring some perspective in moderating this evening's panel about the intersection of education and industry, and to highlight some of the important opportunities and challenges that we face in implementing high quality career and technical education programs for young people throughout the city of New York, and in particular in how we help to prepare the next generation of young people for the careers of tomorrow. Before I get into introducing our panel and kick off our discussion, I'd like to just start with a brief little video that'll give some context and a little background on the impact that career and technical education programs have on students of New York City. So with that being said, I will share my screen and we'll show our video.
The best part of the CTE program is the real-world knowledge.
The hands-on and the curriculum.
Learning new things and being able to pursue what I really want to do in my life.
I would describe career and technical education program as a pathway for students who are intrigued by working with their hands, by building things and have that engineer mindset.
Career and Tech Ed now prepares kids for both college and careers. It allows students choices, and that's really what school's about.
When you mesh college readiness with career readiness, you get a well-rounded individual, someone who can be the leader of tomorrow.
What they really receive here at a career technical education program is the exposure to the industry that they could pursue.
Industry partners are key to the success of CT schools because they guide us on what's up and coming.
They let us know what's going on outside the classroom.
So one of the state requirements is that our kids get 60 hours of internship. Those internship hours are through our partners.
Let's face it, CTE, the first word is career. They provide that real-world career experience for our students. So without them, we wouldn't have that.
It was amazing. I interned alongside two doctors. There were two gynecologists. I was listening to the doctors' stories. I was listening to them put information together, and it's just an experience that blows your mind. And I plan on going back next year.
I'm now attending a construction skills program, which is going to be able to get me into the union, which the school works with.
The industry partners are critical for our success. At each term, we can place up to 32, 36 sometimes, students in restaurants.
We usually get about 5 or 6 students go straight into the union right after high school. We also have students that get hired by our industry partners.
So what's interesting about CT schools is that their graduation rates and their attendance rates are higher than normal academic high schools across the city.
Students come to our school with a passion for whatever it is that they want to study, and that motivates them.
Not only are we excelling academically, but we're excelling in our CTE courses, so we know what to expect when we go to college. It gives you an advantage over other students.
The difference between a CTE graduate and a traditional graduate from high school is that the CTE student brings a level of professionalism and a commitment to a career.
CTE is all about mentoring and guiding our students into the right direction, into the right career.
The hope is that they choose what's best for them. If this is it, then great. We'll push them, we'll support them, carry them if we have to. They have choices.
And those skills are always going to be with you. They're yours, they're yours to keep. It's in your toolbox. Even down the pipe, if you decide, this is what I probably want to do, well, you have something to fall back on.
Once we graduate high school, we know all this stuff and we get our certifications.
We come in here and we have many opportunities and we can strive and we can form our own careers here. And not only do we start our career, but we enhance our careers so that when we do go into the job industry, we start out at the top with the best education possible.
All right. So with that context being set for tonight's conversation, I would like to go ahead and introduce this evening's panelists. We're very honored to have with us tonight from the New York City Council and the chair of the Education Committee, Councilman Mark Traeger. I'd also like to introduce New York State Assemblywoman, the Honorable Alicia Heineman. With us this evening is also the Deputy Executive Director of Career and Technical Education out of the Office of Post-Secondary Readiness at the New York City Department of Education, Ms. Harini Venkatesh. I'd like to welcome Mr. Roger Turjan, the Principal of Food and Finance High School in New York City. Next, we have Mr. Sterling Roberson, the Vice President for Career and Technical Education at the United Federation of Teachers. And finally, a former chair and current member of the CTE Advisory Council in New York City, Mr. Jack Powers. Councilman Traeger, I'd like to turn it to you to start this evening and really help us to understand the context of CTE. Why is CTE important for the New York City community and the future of our New York City economy?
Thank you so much for this very powerful presentation, for gathering us here this evening. And it's great to be with you and some of my great colleagues and friends in government who are very much deeply invested in this work. So folks might know that I myself am a former high school history teacher, so education is deeply personal for me. And it's interesting that on this panel presentation tonight is someone who I've had the honor of visiting myself as a source of inspiration and information, Principal Turjan from Food and Finance. It is great to see the principal because when I took office as council member, there were a couple of schools in my neck of the woods, in my neighborhood, that I wanted to offer more support. They were not getting the type of support which they were getting for many years, quite frankly. And they are both John Dewey High School and Grady High School. And when I visited the schools, I noticed that some of their physical space is so antiquated. And, you know, the schools were still being measured by 21st century accountability metrics, but the physical space and the structures were still stuck in the early 20th century. And I heard about Principal Turjan in his great school, and the principal was kind enough to allow me to visit his school and invite staff from John Dewey, from Grady High School. And it was extraordinary what he has been able to accomplish with his school community, making very strategic investments in updating the physical space to really align it with 21st century opportunities, not just about food, but it's about culture, history. He connected to other disciplines. And as we heard in the presentation, it has a ripple effect in terms of increased attendance, building a sense of school culture. One of the takeaways I had from the visit was, in addition to, he has an amazing tilapia tank there, which is really, really cool. But the fact that his school is in so much demand. He has thousands of kids on a waiting list for only a certain number of spaces. So and the issues I was trying to tackle for Grady and Dewey were the issues of low enrollment. How do we attract local kids and children from our neighborhood to go to our schools and make the right investments? I share that with you because I am proud to update folks that after that visit and after securing a lot of resources for both John Dewey and Grady, we're turning a page. John Dewey, I secured resources I know that UFT, Sterling Roberson joined me on some of these great announcements. We secured millions of dollars to build a state-of-the-art culinary kitchen. It's in somewhat competition with food and finance. I'm not going to compete. But the school has turned the corner. We're making investments in career technical education, making investments in kids, and also attracting staff that really are coming up with new programming that's attracting more students to attend these schools. Enrollment in John Dewey High School, we have great leadership, great investments happening. It's night and day different. At Grady High School just recently, we opened up not just a new kitchen. This is right before the pandemic, and it's unfortunate that the pandemic, here we are, but we're going to get through this. But at Grady High School, before the pandemic, we converted an underutilized space into a state-of-the-art nursing room to prepare students for the healthcare field, to work with local hospitals like Coney Island Hospital for internship opportunities. And the principal there has said to me, Councilman, there is a renewed sense of passion and interest in school culture. It is making a difference in terms of attendance, academic performance, social emotional aspects. And the last thing I'll say, that this work, as I mentioned before, goes beyond just career tech. It builds school culture, but some of the things that we still have to work on as far as next steps, in addition to more investments from the federal, state, and city government, is the issue of how do you certify a school as an official CTE school? Because there are certain requirements. You need a certain number of staff licensed in this field. And that is a challenge for some school communities. And that's where I think we could work with our partners from the city, state, and labor on how do we increase capacity to build out more of these programs. Because once you're certified, you become more eligible for a lot more funding streams from the government, from private resources. But make no mistake, this is an impact that goes beyond just career tech. This is about better attendance, building a sense of school culture, and really meeting, I would say, the whole needs of the child, as opposed to just the academic piece. So I'll pause here, but I'm a big believer in this work because I've seen it work already in my district. And shout out again to Principal Turjan for the inspiration and the information that we turnkeyed into my district. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate that context. Assemblywoman Heineman, turning to you and bringing now the challenges that Councilman Traeger outlined, in the funding and looking at the interplay between the city and the state. Also leveraging your background at the New York State Education Department and your support of education over your career. What does this CTE issues mean to you, and where do you see that kind of interplay between the city and the state?
Well, thank you, Nick, and thank you to the New York City Bar Association, the committees, for bringing us all together. And a lot of what the councilman said, I obviously echo. My background, I worked with the State Education Department for 15 years in all of the non-degree granting schools. So your post-secondary, all of your, I visited dog grooming schools, bartending schools, ultrasound technology schools, phlebotomy, nurse aid, I said auto, I think, cooking schools. All of these schools were non-degree granting. A lot of these schools were people who had just left high school looking for careers. A lot of adults who had changed careers. A lot of immigrants attending these schools. But the bottom line is, after a couple of months or weeks of training, they could get entry-level jobs and move up and be productive citizens in New York City and New York State. And I didn't know the sector before I got the job. And I really commend the state employees who still work there, my former colleagues. And it was important to me. Before that, I also worked in education. So I've been in this field a long time, and the assembly is my new career choice. And it's been a good choice. Let me say that. But for this field in particular, one of the things I found is that I had a lot of older people who would come to me and say, we need to get the wood shop back in the classroom, and the home economics, they called it, back into our schools. But their point was that there's a lack of skilled skilled individuals that are graduating from our high schools that are not going to college and need to be able to work, or those who go to college and can't get a job need to be able to have careers in which to be productive. And so in 2017, I passed I passed a bill which became a law, which was to access the New York City Department of Education to study CTEs, especially and see what is it that we as a state needed to do, and which goes right in line in your question. The biggest problem that we found, and the report shows it, is that there's a lack of money. So I'm so glad that Councilman Traeger said they was able to provide RESO-A money into those 2 schools. But if we're talking about, in addition to that, we know that this sector needs a lot of investment, and the state is slow with investment. It's also slow with the turnaround of the state education department of teachers, certifying teachers to teach CTE programs. Some of it is maybe the cumbersome requirements that they have. The other part is they're understaffed. And a lot of times in the state, what happens is when someone leaves, it's not easy for them to hire right away. They do not control the money in the state education department. The division of budget is who has all the money, and we know who the executive office controls the division of budget. So that's also, which also slows down the process of hiring teachers to be certified to teach our students. I was really glad to see Thomas Edison, the principal of Thomas Edison, in that reel that you showed. We also have a great school, August Martin, that has a great culinary arts program and a pilot program. Those students are in flight simulators. Those students are dressed like they're going to pilot a plane, but they need up-to-date equipment, and it is not cheap. And those are things that we need to invest in as a city and a state moving forward. And those are the things that hold us back in making sure there's a quicker turnaround of teachers, of evaluating teachers, attracting teachers to say, I'm going to be in a classroom with high school kids. But the principal on this, getting someone who's been in the field for a while to turn that around, and knowing that they're really good at teaching, but get them in that setting where they're going to be teaching young people sometimes is a challenge. But I feel that sometimes it needs to be done. I've seen a lot of individuals who were started out as phlebotomists, who are now registered nurses, who are now in physician assistant programs. So there's definitely a relation that once people have the means to take care of themselves, a lot of people do try to do better. And I think we have this is a great panel, and how we leverage that into making sure we're moving forward to address the inadequacies of CTE education in New York State will be a great reward for our students.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate both of you for setting that context. And I really think that sets up the discussion that we'd like to have this evening. Before we get into that discussion, I'd like to turn it now to Harini Venkatesh from the Department of Education to bring some of the perspective on the nuts and bolts of CTE, some specifics about who it serves, the types of programs that we're offering, so we can kind of color in this picture of what CTE in New York City looks like. So Harini, please.
You're muted, Harini.
Harini, we don't hear you yet. There
All
you
right,
go.
can you hear me now?
Yes, now you got to share your screen one more time with us.
Yes. Thank you.
Great. And while we're setting that up, just to let you know, we will be taking Q&A throughout the session, so you can add your questions into the Q&A panel, and those come back to the panelists here, and we will address those as we move through the panel.
All right. Thank you for your patience, and let me try this once again.
We're all living in this new world, Harini, so we're with you.
All right. I think I did it. Yep.
Great. We got it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you to Pat Heck, Leslie Pauletti, and the New York City Bar for giving me this opportunity. Huge thank you for allowing me to share this virtual space with our powerhouse panel here. Before I jump into the nuts and bolts of CTE, definitely want to convey my gratitude to Assemblywoman Heineman and Councilmember Traeger. Your consistent support and advocacy to our CTE programs has been phenomenal, all the way from labs to kitchens to funding for work-based learning opportunities to your advocacy for policy and accountability. I'm hugely grateful on behalf of all our schools. So my name is Harini. I'm here on behalf of the CTE team that sits in the Office of Post-Secondary Readiness, here on behalf of our 135 high schools with 290 CTE programs, over 700 educators and administrators, and most importantly, our 70,000 CTE students. It's officially past my workout. I think it's past 7 o'clock. So I'm also here representing myself as a public school parent. I am here representing Vaishnavi Venkatesh, my daughter, who is at this point 3 weeks into her hybrid learning journey as a freshman, and will definitely be in a CTE program. For the past 3 weeks, Vaishnavi, who's otherwise a quintessential geek, she likes math, she likes science, she likes reading. All she can talk about during any dinner table conversation is this one course that she takes, and it's called Design and Drafting for Production. Every dinner table conversation is about how hands-on her learning is, even within a remote space. So right now, I'm doing CTE at work, and I'm definitely seeing the magic of CTE show up at home as well. So what then is career and technical education? So CTE is a 2 to 6 year program of study where our young people in high schools will undertake a course sequence aligned to a career pathway, integrated with a sequence of work-based learning opportunities and stackable credentials. It is important to note that CTE is a sequence of courses to satisfy a minimum of 7 elective credits. So CTE is an elective credit, and it's also important to note that it's a sequence of courses. It could be more than 7, but a minimum of 7 elective credits. CTE secret sauce are these 3 factors. 1, work-based learning opportunities. So while students are in the classroom, they're getting reinforcements in terms of seeing how their classroom learning translates into real-world learning as well. Students are working in collaboration with both industry and post-secondary partners. Our students graduate high school with prior learning credits that they then take to their colleges. Students are also participating in earning stackable credentials. And I'm sure Roger will talk more about what these stackable certifications look like within a culinary sector. So 3 key ingredients, or the secret sauce of CTE, that I'm definitely seeing play out at my household: work-based learning, our collaborations with industry and post-secondary partners. And you'll soon hear from Jack Powers about how industry supports our schools, and then stackable credentials, all of which make the experience in school extremely relevant for our young people, and also ensure that we're training young people who will then be the talent of tomorrow in New York City. CTE also includes our 9 to 14 early colleges called PTech otherwise, after the first PTech that opened in Brooklyn. So I think it's important to note that CTE includes our grades 9 to 12, but also 9 to 14 colleges, 9 to 14 early college and career schools. As mentioned, the fundamental pillar of CTE is that we have to stay relevant to labor market, and we do this through our strategic partnerships with our industry and post-secondary partners. We have 8 sector-based commissions that advise our schools on curriculum, on credentialing, on how we should structure teacher training, so that what ultimately transfers to our students are relevant to what happens after they finish high school. Jack Powers, will be talking more about what this looks like within a particular sector. So if you drill further down and look into one of our sectors, and arguably one of our largest sectors, media technology and design, this specific sector serves over 13,000 students, 29 programs, and 40 schools. This is also one of our most diverse sectors, includes everything from advertising to theater production and web design. As mentioned, students will be taking a 2 to 6 year sequence in media technology and design. And as they work on their technical skills and curriculum, they will also try to take and pass multiple credentials. And here's a list of credentials that, that the slide provides. So then who are our students? You saw a picture of Vaishnavi, my daughter, but our students are coming from all 5 boroughs. Over 75% of our students are economically disadvantaged. In terms of further demographic details, a majority of our students are Hispanic, followed by Black, Asian, and White. 20% of our students are students with disabilities. Moving further into some more weedy territory, we distinguish our schools into 2 buckets. There are CTE designated schools. These are schools where every student that goes to this school will be in a CTE program of study. And then there are academic schools with CTE programs where not every student will be automatically in a CTE program. So there are some distinctions in how our student demographics break down, depending on if this is a CTE designated school and a school with CTE programs. Just some images here. Want to point out that this young lady right below here was a student from Thomas Edison High School. I know Assemblywoman Heinemann mentioned Moses Ohida, our principal there. So Ms. Prasad was a student at Thomas Edison High School. She leveraged those prior learning credits and was able to breeze through her undergraduate degree. She also took benefit of our internship program and did at least 2 internships while she was still in high school. When she was at Monroe College, she was able to end up with an internship at New York Times, parlayed that internship experience and her first degree with Monroe into her master's degree from Carnegie Mellon. And as we speak, she is now a full-time cybersecurity analyst at New York Times, and also serves as an adjunct professor at Monroe College. So these are our students. In terms of some more data, as I mentioned, we serve over 70,000 students, and our 70,000 students are within 290 programs that sit in 135 schools. Our graduation rates in the dedicated schools are 85.5%, and it's definitely higher than citywide graduation rates. A couple of key achievements, and here's where City Council has made a huge difference to the number of paid internships our students have access to. Based out of our data from last year, we were able to serve over 5,000 students with paid internships that happened during the school year as well as the summer. Our employer partners hosting internships have increased significantly. We have over 500 employers that host CTE interns. And then we have 8 sectors that have college articulation agreements with a CUNY or a SUNY. So this means that if a student went to a CTE program and completed a certain number of credentials and curriculum, they could matriculate into a CUNY with as so much as 12 to 15 prior learning credits. So we're at an interesting time, and so I gave some thought to what our focus is right now and what our focus might be moving forward. In trying to think about our focus, my premise and our premise is always that K-12 has to be an important component of the feedback loop that goes from education to workforce development to economic development. Often there isn't any feedback loop, and if there is one, education is definitely kept outside of the workforce development to economic development feedback loop. So with that premise, what does our near-term focus look like? Much of these, both Councilmember Traeger and Assemblywoman Heineman have already shed some light on. We definitely want to enhance structured work-based learning opportunities. This is the secret sauce that keeps students engaged in their classwork. It is looking very different right now in the remote space, so we're definitely experimenting with all different programming models for work-based learning. We want to think about how to intentionally integrate academic rigor into industry-validated curriculum and credentialing. There was a time, maybe about 5 to 10 years ago, where you would see a definite gap between the graduation rate for CTE schools and the college readiness index. That gap has been consistently being narrowed, and I think one of the reasons is because our students are able to take the advantage of interdisciplinary instructional units. We want CTE to work as well as it does for all our student populations. So our students with disabilities, our L language learners, so definitely focusing on improving CTE program engagement and completion across all student populations. And finally, revisiting teacher upskilling. Our teachers are quintessential, and you will hear from Sterling Roberson, the Vice President of the UFD, soon after. So thinking about what micro-credentialing might look like for our teachers in the near term. All the schools that you saw on the video, Queens Tech, Edison, Food and Finance, they're some of our flagship CTE schools that have been able to attract the student body that they do, critically because they're able to invent and innovate. So what does the future look like? I think much of this will depend upon how CTE is able to align with recovery and rebuilding efforts in our city. And this is where we're going to think about what investment might look like. Thinking about more innovative models of work-based learning, including youth apprenticeships, so the direct pipeline from high school to employment. What might credit accumulation look like and industry credential attainment, so that students are entering a CUNY or a SUNY with those prior learning credits and are able to move from enrollment to college completion. And finally, investing in teacher development, including trying to think about how to open up and create flexibility in teacher certification. I think I had to use this opportunity to share that we will be launching our CTE high school fairs. I believe these are the only high school fairs that have a date right now. So I would appreciate any word of mouth spreading the news about our high school fairs. The website that you see out here has information on the specific dates for the high school fair. With that said, I'm going to turn this over back to you, Nick. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Harini. And I really appreciate you sharing that context with everyone about some of the particulars of the CT programs. You know, over 70,000 students in New York City, over 135 schools, 290 plus programs across the city. So you can really see the depth and the breadth of the programs that we're using to impact students across the city. So taking that broad view, and now let's zoom it back in. And I want to now turn to Principal Roger Turjan from Food and Finance High School. We've been speaking about you a lot here, Roger. Tell us a little bit from your perspective from a school leader. What does this look like on the ground? What are the opportunities and challenges you face in the day-to-day? Help to paint that picture for us. Oh, you're still on mute there. There you go.
I had to unmute myself.
We got you.
Technology is not my strong. I can cook, but I'm not great at technology. I want to thank the Bar Association for doing this this event this evening. It's an honor for me to be here and to be able to talk to all of you and the folks who are viewing this about CTE education. Just a little bit about the start of. I am a chef by profession. I did that for a decade prior to. That was my prior life. And I went from there to education, various levels of education. And when I moved to New York, I started teaching culinary arts. And there was an opportunity where we were to create a small learning communities at the time in the early 2000s. And one of the things that, and I mention this because in terms of creating a school, there's a lot of facets. It's multifaceted in terms of what success looks like and how that can be accomplished and what can be done. And it's evolving constantly. It's not stagnant. And I have to say, when we first started, when we created the school was to target and to focus what it was we wanted to do and who we wanted to do it for. And we were in New York City. We were targeting students in New York City. We were starting targeting students who are larger minorities. At the time, we had a 50% male and female. Now we're more on the female side, believe it or not. But it's still, one of our goals is to be able to provide students who, without schools such as ours and without schools like CTE, would probably not have the opportunity to have that stepping stone to prepare them for career, industry, and post-secondary. So, and it comes with, a lot of cooperation, a lot of help, and, having a staff which is dedicated to that same focus, to that same goal is critical. It's important to have that. Having students serving students who are enthusiastic. That first video when the first clip that you showed, they speak better about that than I ever could in terms of, what they expect, what they're looking forward to, what they're going to do with it. So they're the spokes people for and the better voice in terms of being able to project what is important to them. And it's our responsibility to be able to provide them with those things and those opportunities. And then the next part is parents, having parent support, having parents supporting their children in their education, in their learning, and being part of that community, which is incredibly important for the success of the students. And it's also important for the school to know that the parents are there to work with the students, to help with the students in progressing to that. The next part is supportive leadership. We're very fortunate. I'm in Manhattan. We have an incredible superintendent who is incredibly supportive, who has, we have an executive superintendent who is supportive, and these folks understand what CTE is. And this is important because if you have people at the top who don't understand what it is we're doing, because, one of the things we talked about in this is that CTE is really expensive. It's really expensive to support the infrastructure. It's really expensive for supplies, and depending on what it is you're teaching, whether it be food or wood or plumbing supplies or what have you, it's expensive. And it's important to have leadership that understand where these funds are going, and it's equally important to have those funds available, which is something that we're relying on Councilman and Traeger and his folks and the state assembly person to be there for us and to understand, and I believe they do, and that's where again that support is incredibly important to making schools successful. We have a great central office. I mean, we have Harini here, who's I've known for many years, and all of these different constituents are really important, very critical to creating a successful school. One of the most important, and I probably shouldn't say one of the most important, but a critically important part of a successful school is partnerships. Partnerships is something that without them, we would not be who we are. We would not have gone as far as we have been. We wouldn't have the tilapia, that Councilman Traeger talked about, because we have a great partnership with Cornell University Extension. So we have the tilapia farm, and we have the greenhouse on the roof, and these types of things. But we also have Food Education Fund, who is an incredible partnership for us that work with our students and for the success of our students. They provide opportunities that we as a school could never afford financially, in terms of giving students grants and scholarships and supporting. This is something a lot of people don't understand as well, as they continue supporting our students even after they graduate. Our alum are part of our family, so they continue to support and to help students in their education, in their lives. So again, the Food Education Fund plays an important part in that. They are also key for our linkage with our industry connections. They assist us in connecting with the industry for the internships. As I said in one of the clips in there, sometimes we have from 10 to 20 to 30 interns out in one term. Even in this COVID time, they have connected, something like 10 or 12 partners who are taking in students right now to do internships. Several of them are remote, some of them are in person. So again, they work really, really closely with the industry, and they are incredible links for us and opportunities for our students in providing them with these internships, work-based learning opportunities. And so again, the partnerships are critical. And if you would have asked me, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where would we be today? I could not have told you, I could not have expressed exactly where we were, because I had never imagined having the type of partnership relationships that we have. And that's, with Food Education Fund, Cornell University Extension, with the Culinary Commission, that we attend as well. Because again, these are leadership opportunities and that we take advantage of because they're important. We have our advisories. Our advisories have post-secondary folks on there. They have industry people. So they are the folks who keep us focused, keep us in tune with what's happening in the industry. And all of these things are important because again, we're in education, we're inside a building. And so we need to rely on those partnerships to talk to us about what's actually happening out in the industry, so that we can best serve our students and providing them the training and the education that they need so that we can best serve the students, and they in turn can best provide services to and get the opportunities from the industry, both in a career area or post-secondary, if you will. So again, it's a really large circle, and it's interdependent in terms of success. CTE schools cannot make it on their own. They have to have all of these and more different types of facets to make that happen. And I credit, I have to credit these folks that I just mentioned, and there's a lot more that I failed to, who make food and finance a success, and who have made us the unique school that we are, because we are the only school in New York State that has a culinary program, which is a 4-year sequence. And so again, all these folks have made this possible. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at some point if anyone has any for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that, Roger. And I know that we're going to get into the impact of those industry partnerships and what all that means. Before we get there, I know that one of the other issues that has been brought up, and also coming up in the questions that I'm seeing, around supporting teachers and how do we get more teachers into the system, the challenges around teacher certification, all of those types of things. I'd like to turn it now to Mr. Sterling Roberson from the United Federation of Teachers to bring some perspectives about the challenges and opportunities as it relates to educators in the CTE space. So Sterling, please.
Well, thank you, Nick. Let me just, like everyone that indicated on the panel, I want to thank the New York City Bar Association for this event and bringing us all together to talk about CTE in New York City and how critical it is. On behalf of Michael Mulgrew, President, and the United Federation of Teachers, we are all in as it relates to CTE and how we move it forward. And it's important personally. I am really a big advocate for CTE is because way back when, I was a vocational education student out of the Bronx of Samuel Gompers High School, those that can remember the days of vocational education. And there was conversations. I wasn't a part of it, thank goodness, but there were educators that were assembled similar to this that was talking about the future and what we needed to do to prepare young people when they knew that there was going to be a shortage of vocational educators by the early 90s. So with that being said, it's near and dear to me because from a graduate of a vocational school, now a CTE school, when you think about it, I was an intern as a teacher in a pilot program that recruited, trained and retained teachers for over 3 decades, and ultimately to bring me to a position as vice president representing over 200,000 members. One would argue that that would be an enormous feat if you thought about that in the early 80s, right? That a young kid from the Bronx would be representing so many people. So this is near and dear because the work that everyone on this panel has done previously, and I have to give them shout outs because it's very important to do so, for the councilwoman who we lobbied in Albany, a collective group of us on this call to go into our office to talk about CTE and talk about funding. It's important to be able to pass legislation on accountability to make sure that we're in the right direction and we have accountability on what we need to do to address some of the things that may be challenging to us. In addition to that, Mark Traeger, who held hearings around CTE in New York City, that was very important in terms of what we do by way of CTE and what we need to do in terms of that. So for me, this is very important. But what is that? Everyone talked about this, and it was very important when we're talking about investing in our educators. How do we build structures to support what they do every single day, as well as how do we work in partnership and collaboration to be able to support teachers so that they can engage students in their education, commit them to learn, and put them on pathways where they can literally find a pathway to the career of their choice. Now, this is important because when we think about what we've been able to do, knowing that these challenges exist, we've been able to work with the State Education Department and the Department of Education, with Harini's team and others to create pathways for teaching, for folks to come into the teaching profession. We know it's very difficult in our CTE space because industry professionals, because of salary gaps, because of all kinds of other issues, it's sometimes very challenging to recruit folks from industry to be a part of teaching. So there's all kinds of other conversations. So we've been able to make some headway in terms of the pathway. Have we done it all? Absolutely not. Do we have work to do? But we did lay the foundation to be able to have folks from industry who want to be able to deliver their skills to others, especially young people, and be an inspiration to them. How do we make sure it's easier for them to get into a pathway to teaching? One of the important issues that we talk about every single day is professional learning for teachers, not just on pedagogical practice, but in CTE, it's almost like you have to do your pedagogical practice, but you also have to keep up by way of content in your specialty area, which is a very difficult thing when you have a caseload of students, but at the same time, you have to keep up with your profession. But it takes, as Roger indicated, as Harini, is the partnerships that we have from the CTE Advisory Council and the commissions, and Jack will talk about that and the wonderful work that he's done as the chair, as well as a former chair, but also as a part of the commission. The endless work on teacher professional development for teachers. How do we make sure that teachers have externships? Like students have work-based learning opportunities, teachers need externship opportunities so that their skills are continuously sharp, because the industry changes overnight. And just to walk us through the challenges, just in this, over the last few months, which seems like an eternity, right? We moved from transitioning from a traditional school setting to remote setting overnight. Now that is immense in terms of what are the conversations that had to be had. Number one, around safety, but we're not far into safety and CTE. That's number one, right? We think about OSHA standards. We think about all of the things that makes our shop run. But imagine we had to think about safety in the era of COVID overnight to think about how do we open schools and reopen them, and how do we plan so that students still are not denied an education, and how do we make sure that we have support from those students in our communities that are from economically disadvantaged communities, where they don't necessarily have the access that they need to technology that we have to experience, the access to Wi-Fi, and we can see even in our own spaces as educators and as leaders from all different vantage points, some of the immense challenges that we've had. But one of the things that we know through this transition and work in terms of getting schools back on track, slowly but surely, in terms of that effort, it's our collective conversation about what are the needs of the schools, the educators in those schools to be able to support them. In CTE, we have a lot of deliverables that's not necessarily aligned with just the academics. We have the academics that we have to deliver, but we also have to deliver the hands-on. As Roger talked about in his school, the creativity that they came in terms of adjusting their schedule so students can get their hands-on work that they actually need to actually complement the academics. And it's also, as he indicated, was the work-based learning experiences. And Harini highlighted that as well in terms of the work-based learning experience that's necessary for students to be able to be in contact with someone from industry that's aligned to what they're learning and the curriculum that's being delivered by the educators. Now, this is not just a one person, one woman, one man show. It is, as everyone talked about, it's a collaboration. It requires training. It requires a constant review of curriculum. But one of the things that I'm happy about over these last few months is that we were able to work with the Department of Education and Harini and her team to do a couple of things that I think is important to be able to share. How do we really do a real capture of inventory and build a support structure where it can be one-stop shopping for resources for teachers and doing it by sector? So that whatever industry, and yes, and it's a live document, so teachers from whatever industry, they can actually go in and get the resources, curricular resources, assessments, what is being used, number one, to reach high quality CTE, because they're doing it based on how programs are approved, but also how we engage in those folks that may have standalone programs and not from our traditional dedicated CTE schools, but have a program that is engaging and doing well for the students. But how do we actually provide resources for them? Also part of the conversations outside of Jack, we'll talk about the commission work, but how do we actually create sector-based communities where teachers can come together, share ideas, share best pedagogical practices, be able to think about working with industry, connecting where they are part of a ecosystem that it's them doing the work that they do every day in terms of delivering instruction for students, but at the same time, being able to connect with someone from their industry so they can know how the industry is changing because they're talking to industry professionals. They can exchange ideas and exchange curriculum ideas, lesson planning ideas, so that each one, not just teach one by way of students, but how do we teach each other and lift all boats citywide. So in terms of one of those things are very important that I would say, and it's ongoing as it relates to scheduling and as Irene indicated on her slides, how do we revisit and upgrading teacher skills? How do we market micro target, right? These are further conversations when we think about onward and what do we do moving forward? How do we micro credential or micro target credentialing? Because we have folks in our industry that had, similar to Roger, who's now a leader of a school, but comes from a different industry, that comes from the culinary industry and brings his expertise. There are individuals that have prior experiences in other areas that we need to be able to tap into, knowing that there's going to be challenges moving ahead. We'll still lobby, as we do as an organization, so that when people say funding, but more about how do we use funding to invest in our students, because the outcomes speak for themselves in terms of kids' pathway, how they're retained in college. So I look forward to our continued conversation, but I think in terms of capturing the work that the folks on this panel is doing, as well as their colleagues outside of this is very important. And I think I just wanted to sort of like bring all of this together. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the parents. in terms of the parental engagement that we do at the UFT. We engage thousands of parents, and we engage parents in focus groups in terms of what parents want to see and what they feel in terms of how we deal with their precious commodity, and that's their children, and how we educate them. So these are all parts of the conversation that I look forward to in terms of being engaged in it. So I thank you, and it's great to be here with these distinguished members.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sterling. I appreciate that. I also appreciate all the questions that are coming into the Q&A panel here. We're going to get to all those questions as best we can here as we weave this through the conversation. You know, Jack, I want to turn it to you to round out our first round of the panel discussion here. You know, Sterling mentioned a lot about the sector-based groups and the industry partnerships and how important that is for teachers. And you know, Roger mentioned on how important that is to bring those in for the opportunities for students. Can you help us to bring some perspective on CTE from the industry partner perspective?
Yeah, let me give you a sense of the complexity of all this and the role that careers and businesses and people outside of the system play. The folks here who are the Department of Ed people are the pillars of the school system. They're the people that hold it all up. We industry partners are sort of the flying buttresses. We support the system from the outside. And we're out there in the business world seeing what the results of our businesses are, and then trying to bring them into the schools to be able to change the results of change the paths that the school system's taking. I want to show you 2 or 3 pictures that will help bring that up, make that a little bit more sensible. In the way we've set this up, there are about 1,000 businesses of different kinds here in New York City that are involved in CTE in New York. Most of them are in one of the industry commissions, industry councils, all sorts of clever ways of talking about what business is. We got that? Hold on. There we are. And so what we do is kind of pretty simply put in this little swirly slide we have about the curriculum and the teacher training and the things we're involved in. Every CTE program, all those 300 some odd with all those kids, has to be certified by the state as being a up-to-date and properly connected. It has to have connections to colleges or post-secondary applications. It's got to be up-to-date equipment, as we've kind of heard in some of the discussions here. And so, and every 5 years, a CTE program has to go through a review cycle again. So the industry people are all on a bunch of different committees to go into the schools and make sure everything is up to date. Work experience, Irini's already talked about. It's internships. Paid internships are important. Only rich kids do unpaid internships. And the ability to go to work for a living and see how other people are interacting with each other and the culture of work is as important as some of the skills that we wind up teaching. There's that great moment when you get your first job, you get your first paycheck, and you've been clicking off how many hours you worked and how many millions of dollars you're making. And you look at the check and you see how much they took out of that first check. And that's a big part of the education experience. We're very big in my area, particularly, which is media technology and design, which is graphics. We used to be the high school printing commission, and then we were the graphic arts commission, and then we're the graphics commission, and now we're the media technology and design commission. But in businesses like ours, in businesses like culinary, in businesses like automotive, technology moves things along pretty quickly. And so you're constantly having to teach your own staff in a business what's going on and what's new. And we try to bring that into the schools and make sure that the teachers are up to date on what's going on. And then, of course, we act as mentors both to teachers and to students. In the school system, we all know the school buildings are always described as crumbling infrastructure. We always know that the management changes every couple of years. I'm on my 13th chancellor, I think. And the kids themselves are in and out of high school in 4 years. The thing that lasts, the asset that we nurture in the school system are the teachers, because they're the people who are going to be here 20, 30 years, some of them. And so mentoring the teachers, training the teachers, and getting them involved in a community of practice rather than just a teacher running, doing some book learning and test taking out of a book is kind of important. We also do in different sectors some great competitions and some scholarships, which are a way for us in business to be able to know whether what we're telling the schools is actually getting out into the school system. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. The CTE Council is an advisory council appointed by the chancellor of, I think, about 30 different companies now from all over the city and all over the areas. It's a tough spec because New York's a big city with lots of different companies and lots of different kinds of businesses. And the council is sort of at the top of that. But as Harini's slide showed, we also have these individual industries focused advisory commissions in different areas. And you know what? We have people who are involved in the schools in a lot of different ways. Some of them once a year to do a plant tour. Some of them once a year to do to support a commission, to support a council. In the area of so much of the people on this program, that we have a group called the Justice Resource Center that works with law firms to be able to bring our kids into the law firms. Not just to run the copying machine, but to run a proper internships and a proper set of work-based learning opportunities. That's a great set of programs in the legal area that I know a number of people who are on this program, on this webcast are part of. They do mock trials, and they even New York City teams wind up at The Hague in moot court arguing cases. One of the great parts of the focus is that, as I said before, a lot of the industry partners are there for a long time. In our graphics area, we do teacher training, we do a competition, we have a scholarship foundation. There's 501c3s scattered throughout the CTE landscape and different sponsors in different areas. In our area, we do an annual competition that lets us go in and see the kids work and see how they're progressing. And then a scholarship foundation where we actually see them on the way out and actually get them into a mentoring program. So we've got kids who come in middle school and then come back after they've graduated college with one of our scholarships, and then are able to have an engagement with a career. One interesting part, we talked about parents, Sterling did. One thing that we do with our scholarship foundation is it's an annual scholarship, and you have to bring your parent or whoever to come pick up the check. And we make a big program at the Hearst Tower in Midtown, and it's industry people come and talk about what a great career media technology is, what a fabulous life these kids are going to have. We have the kids talk about their progress along the way, the first year graduates and the third year graduates, and we have some industry folks. So we're taking a look at a kid in a larger view than what most typical high school programs have, where we're able to actually do some longer term development. So in all of this, the industry partners are always excited to work with schools in whatever way they can. Let me get this off. Sometimes it's just for once or twice. Sometimes it's for a relatively long-term view. For us and the advisory commission and being able to get advisors, it's a kind of a constant battle. We're always churning new people coming into the commissions because somebody gets a job and gets hooked up with this commission, and nobody's in a job for more than 5 years in business nowadays anyway. And so we've got to find some new ones to be able to come in and fill them out. And it's an interesting and exciting part of it because you see the kids, you see the teachers, you're part of you're part of your industry community into the school systems. And it's a great feeling, it's a great payback for the folks who are involved as industry partners. And we want to be able to give as much as we can to those next generation kids, partly for that the capitalistic reasons we want good workers in our field, but partly because we all love our industries, whatever they are, and we want everybody else who comes into it to love it as well. So we're all evangelists for whatever particular segment that we're working in.
Well, thank you, Jack. And the one thing that I'll say, and just to compliment you on your efforts over the years to be a champion of CTE, I think with the exception of Jack, everyone on this panel this evening is paid to do the work that we do. Jack is here out of his passion for this area and helping students to advance in these opportunities. So thank you for that, Jack. I really appreciate that. as we move through the next session of the discussion here this evening, I want to get to some of the questions that are percolating. So I'm going to organize these in a few themes, and I will also encourage our panelists, if you see a question that's in the Q&A box and you'd like to type some responses, please go ahead and do that as we're answering these questions. That way we can kind of multitask a little bit as we go along. I think there's three major buckets here that I'd like to get into. The first is around the funding and how we think about that in terms of CTE programs. The second that we'll try to weave in here are some of the city and state issues around program certification leading to teacher certification, because a lot of the funding challenges come out of that opportunity. And then the third is I want to be able to have a conversation about equity and access. There's a number of questions about how we can expand CTE programs or how we can leverage CTE programs to help different types of underserved communities. So we'll try to weave into these three conversations here. And at this point now, Kevin, you can take us into gallery view so we can see everyone here. The first one here, let's dive into this funding issue. You know, just for the benefit of the audience members, there's generally about three primary funding sources that our schools are dealing with here. There's, you know, the first is the Fair Student Funding Formula, which is the tax levy funding that schools get to support their operations, of which there is or is not, you know, a bucket of money for CTE. The second of which is the Perkins funding, which is Perkins 5. That's the federal legislation that provides state funding for career and technical education programs. The important thing to note about the Perkins funding is that this is to supplement, not supplant. So this is money that's helped to support and add on to CTE programs that's doled out to the city and then given out to schools based on this program approval process. And the third, which Councilman Traeger has spoken about, is Resolution A. This is the money that comes from City Council to help support these large investments that are necessary to help bring the facilities and equipment and all of the things that Assemblywoman Hyman talked about, the you know, bringing those things into the schools. So let's start there. And I just want to open it up. Councilman Traeger, just thinking from your perspective, how you utilize those types of funds. You know, how do you see this, and how do we ensure that we're thinking about CTE in terms of an investment and not an expense?
Great question, very important issue. It cuts to the heart of many of the issues our schools are facing. So it's important for folks to know, and I think the principal will certainly understand and appreciate this. The majority of our public schools in New York City are not receiving 100% of their Fair Student funding. This is the city tax levy dollars. The schools rely on city, state, and federal funding streams to have their operating budgets. Federal funding has remained flat for years and very inadequate. New York State, as many folks know, is still, you know, trying to meet its obligations of a legal lawsuit that was filed over a decade ago, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, CFE, where the highest court in New York ruled that New York State for years has been underfunding high needs school districts and not providing children a basic sound education, which is mandated by the state constitution. The estimate where we've got, the last that I got was about 1.2 billion at least for New York City schools alone, but over $4 billion statewide. Now that is a tremendous impact. I mean, if take a look at like Abraham Lincoln High School in my district in Coney Island, they're still owed about $900,000 when you look at Fair Student funding. That makes a tremendous difference in terms of additional staff and resources that you can bring in to meet the needs of children, CTE programs, attracting the type of staff and building their capacity to get CTE licensing. And a consequence of our schools being this underfunded is that CTE falls many times to the wayside, meaning that schools are trying to figure out ways and how to use their resources to meet how they're being measured. So for example, if New York State is asking about region scores, asking about, you know, your state and federal, you know, all these assessments, then many times these critical programs do not get the type of investments which they need. Schools are trying to, you know, just get by, trying to, you know, just meet state accountability measures. The issue, however, which I think I mentioned in my remarks in the beginning of this presentation, is that investing in CTE is not just about CTE. As I mentioned before, the stories of John Dewey High School, a school that for years was not getting the type of resources and quite frankly, the support which they needed. It became a turnaround tool to turn the ship around, to increase enrollment. Because once you have funding in place, once you have a vision in place, with of course the right leadership and staff support, then you can begin to make targeted investments, introduce your physical space to the 21st century, because many of our schools, I want to be very clear, many of our schools are very old. We have schools built with money from the New Deal that have not seen upgrades since the New Deal. And, you know, I worked in a school building. If a teacher turned on the microwave in the teacher's lounge, my smartboard would turn off. So it's a true story. So once we're able to make those investments, the first thing you'll see is that staff, they get innovative. What else can we come up with in terms of innovative programming to increase enrollment? Once you increase enrollment, you increase attendance, you increase teacher retention. I'm sure the principal would agree. Once you have that teacher who's certified, now you have to keep them. You don't want to lose them. Teacher retention is a major issue in order to keep these programs going. If only one teacher has the certification and they leave the building for whatever reason, you're in trouble. So we need to kind of expand the pool of folks who are eligible. That changes a school culture. So fair student funding, if we actually give the schools the resources they need, you will see greater investments in CTE, greater investments in these opportunities, and actually the outcomes would be exponentially great in terms of career-based options, attendance, enrollment, school culture, but it all comes down to giving schools what they rightfully and legally deserve. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And you know, with that being said, at the same time with this fair student funding, we also, you know, have, you know, think about how we introduce new CTE programs, which you mentioned, and bringing this in as that turnaround factor. Assemblywoman Heineman, thinking about, you know, the interplay between the state and how we're, you know, getting those funds for Perkins. One of the changes with the Perkins 5-state plan is that only state-approved programs are eligible to get funding. How can we look to, you know, open this up so schools that want to explore new CTE programs or communities that want to explore these programs are able to have access to that investment that allows this to start so they can prove their worth and then get in that pipeline for that type of funding?
Great question. So I think, you know, I am one of 150 assembly members, one of 213 state legislators and an executive office. And Councilman Traeger alluded to it earlier, but when we talk about the fair student funding formula, what comes down from the federal government when it comes to the state level, how that's divided up, the conversations that happen during budget time, as Sterling knows, the trips of everybody and their mama comes to Albany trying to get a piece of the budget that gets bigger every year. Even though we're in the crisis that we're in, this is the biggest state budget that we've passed in the history of New York State. So I always believe that the money is there. It's how we advocate for the money to get down to the city of New York. And I know when we had talked in earlier planning for this panel, not being bipartisan or not, you know, besmirching anyone, to say that it does have relationships do mean a lot. And I do feel that when any individual comes to Albany to advocate, because remember, I used to go to Albany to advocate as a parent for money before I became a legislator, and thought when I became a legislator it'd be so much more easier. Then I realized I think it was harder as a legislator to realize how the dollars come from the federal government. I'll give you an example. We're waiting for the stimulus to come. It still hasn't been here yet. When it comes to the state of New York, and then that money trickles down to not just New York City. And we have to remember this when we talk about CTE. It's not just a city issue. It is a state issue. We are focused on New York City, but there are communities, underserved communities around the state who need programs like this. Outside of New York, we talk about BOCES a lot. My colleagues will talk about that, and there are some more affluent communities when we talk about fair student funding. So Nick, it's not a real easy question to answer. Just know that when we talk about advocacy for dollars to come down, it's important that people know who their legislators are, not just on the city and the state level, but federal level, throughout the state of New York. What is the ask of our congressional members and our two senators, US senators, when they go to DC to advocate for those money? Because like you said, Perkins has been flat for a while. Well, so has TAP has been flat, and that is obviously state-based aid for higher ed, but there is a problem in New York State where money goes out of the state but doesn't come back here. And so it's a much bigger answer to that question, but I do honestly believe that knowing who your state legislators are, and as we're going into next year, forming those plans of how to leverage those dollars to come to our CTE programs, because I just wanted to touch on this too. CTE programs are looked at like separate and apart from education, and a lot of you who are in this panel understand that. It is not something that's over here in the corner. As Roger, you said, and as Jack said, this is something where you see how students thrive, not only in our schools, but when they leave our schools. And I think that's something that we have to realize. This is lifelong learning. It is different, but it is still as equal to college and like college readiness that we talk about. And I think that's very important for us to stress as we move forward talking about CTE education.
I really appreciate that perspective. And the other thing is, you know, we've had this discussion when we met initially, is changing the mindset from expense to investment. And you really make that point well about, we are investing in a talent pipeline. We're investing in the future of the economy here. And I appreciate that. And as one of the takeaways for our audience, to know your legislators, to know who's helping to advocate for these things. So you make those calls, to send those emails, write those letters, to advocate for this funding on that behalf. Harini, just turning to you a little bit and thinking about, maybe give some perspective about that state approval process for schools and what schools have to go through to become state approved and be recognized and have options, to get that funding. How does that play out? What are some of the challenges that schools are facing in that process? You're on mute there, Harini.
I'm happy to answer that, but just quickly to go back to something that Councilmember Traeger mentioned and Assemblywoman Heineman mentioned, extrapolating further, there have been rigorous research studies that have been conducted on students who have gone through a entire CTE sequence, and there are exponential gains in their lifetime earnings, right? So when you're talking about investments, it comes back in terms of tax revenue, because students who go through CTE programs enter the job market at a higher starting salary. So just wanted to mention that. In terms of Knighthood program approval, as Sterling mentioned, it is a 5-year cyclical process. A school must have curriculum in place that is aligned to New York state standards and to industry standards. All the curriculum must be delivered by a CTE licensed teacher. The school must demonstrate an entire sequence of workspace learning opportunities. Right now, there is a requirement for 54 hours that wasn't in place before this. The school must have a curriculum that ends in a culminating assessment, a 3-part culminating assessment. And then, of course, there is data requirement. The school must maintain data for all students going through the 4-year sequence for a 5-year period, at least. So it's a fairly rigorous process. And I think the team, the CTE team, has definitely supported, stepped up. We're organized by borough. So every CTE program in a borough has a program quality manager whose single task is to support schools to and through program approval. So going beyond program approval towards program quality. That's our ultimate goal in moving schools through multiple steps.
I appreciate that overview. Jack, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the folks at the DOE on Harini's team do a hell of a job with the state certification. So the state comes up with a giant sort of certification, so you must do this to be certified, and so we must do this. But that certification process is not a very perfect process. And so it's one of the ones where I've been through a lot of those re-up, those 5-year reviews and so on. It's kind of out of our hands, but we've got to, in some cases, just fill out the paperwork to be able to get that certification. It's the other side of this, though, and this is another place where both Sterling and Harini's team have been working. In New York State, you have to have 5 Regents diplomas to be able to graduate high school. And after a lot of back and forth and a lot of discussion, meetings, and endless PowerPoints, nowadays, one of those 5 Regents can be replaced with an industry certification. So, for example, if you have an automotive certification from the automotive guys or the IT guys, or in my area, the Adobe certifications, that's an acceptable diploma to leave school with. And from my point of view, it's a way better diploma to go out into the job market with than a New York City high school diploma by itself.
Yeah, I appreciate that flag, because I think that was an important change that the Board of Regents made a few years ago in allowing that to be to replace that Regents. It really puts an incentive for school leaders to make that a priority. Sterling, you wanted to add something to that conversation there?
Just quickly, in terms of as Irini walked us through the process for program approval, one of the things that we have to start to think about as we communicate the value of CTE is a continuum. It is not just where we sit in the secondary space or where we sit in the middle school or where we sit post-secondary to career. The goal of moving to program quality or to a high quality CTE program is that you move folks through not just at the end of their career where they get an entry level job or they hire, but it's also a cost savings. If you think back the days of vocational education, what you learned in a vocational education course was the first 2 years of what you had in college in your set area. My background was electronics and engineering. So we covered just about the first couple of content, but we have schools in the city. If we look at like a Rogers school, you think about the aviation school, where they cover their almost the same curricula as the college in which they are articulated with, and they match up with it. And they're also governed not just by the New York City Department of Education, but the FAA. So these 9 through 14, what that means by way of investment is a cost savings for a college debt, where not only will students have the skills to be able to pay for some of it, but if we have moved to real high quality CTE as we get to academic integration, CTE is literacy. It is all of those things that students need, but it also saves them money in the long run by way of preparing themselves for a career. And that's what we have to also talk about. So it's not like we're just talking about it in like we've done traditionally as a standalone. We have to think about this as a continuum, that it doesn't stop. And as Assemblywoman mentioned earlier, is lifelong learning. You don't just stop here, you move to a continuum, and in the long run, you get a big return on that investment. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that is such an important point to make about CTE and how this is setting up lifelong learning, particularly as we look at the 9 to 14s. You know, Roger, I've been in schools. I've gone through the program approval process as an educator, and I know all this stuff sounds great. Give us your perspective on the day-to-day. You've got to figure out how to make the ends meet. You got to figure out how to get this program approval process done. You got to figure out how to find certified teachers, and you need to make sure that you're aligning your programs to the needs of the world. So how do you do that?
Well, I'm just going to start with a comment that Councilman Traeger said. My building is not quite that old, but when I went into work on Monday, my technology wasn't working at all, and I had to find out if the lights in the basement had been turned off. Because if they've turned the lights off in the basement hallway, I lose my technology in my office. So just as an aside of old buildings and things that happen that, you know, you have to know the building if you want to succeed or if you want to make it. But anyway, I just thought I'd mention that as an aside because it was just a chuckle. It is in terms of the the certification process, you know, it's long and it's tedious, but it has, because I've gone through, you know, several iterations of the process, and I just went through the last one last year, if I'm not mistaken. And the office and the state have made it a lot more workable, a lot more doable, if you will. It's a lot more organized. Back in the day when I first did it, you know, we had, you know, like these volumes of books that, you know, we had to submit. And now everything is done electronically. But again, you know, the thing is as you go on, it gets refined and it becomes better and better. And we get better at it too. Obviously, you know, we know what the expectations are. But as a school grows and as a school develops, then you also have to refocus and retool to meet the needs of the industry. And when we do the recertification, it gives us the opportunity to be able to really kind of hone in on that, because you know it's just like anything else. You know, if you're not forced sometimes to do something, you know if everything is working, no, you know you're good, right? But you know the recertification process kind of helps us refocus, helps us solicit information, get more input from industry, and that's where our partners come in, which is really critical. So in that way, the certification is really helpful. One of the certifications that we have in addition to the state certification is our industry certifications with the National Restaurant Association, which is ProStart. What it makes our certification unique is that any student who receives that certification from our school, from the New York State Restaurant Association, that certification is recognized throughout the entire country. So they can go into any restaurant or hospitality industry that are members of the National Restaurant Association, which most of them are, and also any school that is affiliated with the National Restaurant Association. They will usually grant all of our students advanced credit to one degree or another. Because one of the things that Sterling was saying is our students graduating, I mean, again, just kind of back up a little bit. I taught post-secondary for 15 years. So when I came into the New York City schools, I brought all this with me. I brought the curriculum. I brought all of this information, so I built the school around what post-secondary expected. So our students are just not learning, measuring and like doing simple home measurements and that kind of thing. They're professionals. And our students going out to the industry are well prepared. They are well prepared. And I have, we're proud of our students going out and working in their internship sites. And our internship sites are extremely happy with our folks. So again, it goes back to, the training that, is the opportunity of training that we have in our school. And that is largely due to, again, the certification process, whether it be the state certification, whether it be the industry certification. It guides us in terms of making sure that we are serving all of our students and giving the students the opportunity to achieve. And as I said earlier, what I find it really a great opportunity for us to be able to offer what we do to our students in New York City, because again, our population is mostly young folks of color, low socioeconomic, high free lunch and reduced so again this is giving them that opportunity that they can't go to summer camp and spend thousands of dollars learning how to cook and doing all these things. We are able to do that as part of their formal education, getting them ready to get all of their academics, their 5 regents or 4, and then getting their certification and going to post-secondary or go on into a career. So again, all of these things are they're linked, and it's part of that that whole cycle that I talked about earlier in terms of being able to prepare students correctly and well to best serve them.
I appreciate that response, and I want to tie that into something else that comes out of the new Perkins 5 legislation, which is the the local needs assessment, the comprehensive local needs assessment, and really on how we align the needs of a community with the CTE programs that we're offering, and how do we tie that and make that connection. So Roger, you kind of teed that up nicely there. Harini, can you just walk us through that process from the district perspective on how you did that? And then I'd like to go to Councilman Traeger and to get his thoughts on the types of needs that he sees the city anticipating, and also Assemblywoman Heineman. So Harini, go ahead and talk us through that process first.
Sure, thanks, Nick. So with Perkins 5, which is a new legislation that went into effect for this school year, Perkins, the federal funding became, could be moved only to NYCED approved CTE programs, as you mentioned. Every NYCED approved CTE program, right now the cutoff date was December 30, 2019. So all programs that were approved by NYCED up until December 30, 2019 went through a comprehensive local needs assessment process where the district was looking at the programs where the district was looking at each NYCED approved program in terms of their performance indications and definitions of size, scope, and quality, right? So we looked at the program and looked at where the program came in terms of Perkins performance indicators, the size of the program, the scope of the program, and the quality of the program. So based on this times 151 programs, we came up with a comprehensive local needs assessment for the entire district. New York State actually allowed us enough flexibility to create the process on our own, because we're definitely the biggest out there, because typically other states, other towns in the state would have maybe a couple of programs, and we had a whole bunch. So we had to think about the process as we were implementing it. So through this comprehensive local needs assessment process, we came up with high level I think there were about 5 needs that surfaced really high up there. We then ran the needs that came up to the district with our stakeholders, our schools, our industry partners. Jack was a part of reviewing our comprehensive local needs assessment. And for this school year, we will be focusing on 2 priorities. One is workplace learning and ensuring we're providing access to workplace learning across all student populations, and tracking programmatic outcomes, data. And secondly, ensuring that we improve engagement and completion across all student populations, specifically our special populations, students with disabilities, and our ELL students. So those are the 2 priority areas that Perkins 5 eligible programs will be focusing on for this school year. And then we have to redo the process again beginning next fall.
I just want to add something as well, and I appreciate those very informative, helpful remarks. A school community that does not often get a lot of attention, but I think we should elevate District 75 in our school system. So this is also personal for me. My father is a retired District 75 teacher. I represent a number of his great schools in my district as well. And they have also found ways to incorporate career technical education for children who really historically have been marginalized, have really not been, are very much underserved. And they are also our kids. These are also our children, and they deserve every opportunity to succeed. And they have also incorporated programs, whether it be in culinary arts or in graphic arts or in coding and other types of programming, to really help better meet their needs. I also want to just add, because I want to mention that, of course, this is about careers and workforce, but we also have to make sure that we are serving the needs of all of our kids. And this is a very effective tool, more ways than one. I did pass a bill in the council, which became law. And of course, the pandemic has affected this, to kind of reevaluate the formula for fair student funding and how to try to add more weight in terms of equity to better meet the needs of our kids. The last time the formula was adjusted, or actually created, was under the Michael Bloomberg administration, and I think it needs an update, because there's a certain weight in the formula for CTE schools, but I think Principal Turjan would argue it's still inadequate. And I also want to just give a shout out to our great state ally and partner, Assemblywoman Heineman. We have some great friends and champions in the Assembly majority. I wish more folks would follow the Assemblywoman's leadership in terms of greater support for our schools. But this is the type of partnership that we need, state and city, looking at the foundation aid, because that is the aid from the New York State down to our school system, and actually make it truly more equitable and fair. And I would argue to the state and city and the federal government to allow schools like Principal Turjan to allow him greater flexibility on how to use these resources. Why is FSF so precious to the schools? Not just because it's city money. It gives them the greatest flexibility without a lot of strings attached on how to best use those resources to meet the needs of our kids. So yes, they need resources, but they also need flexibility, with minus those strings attached to them, so they can come up with these innovative programs that I agree with you, these are good investments that will, number one, improve academic performance, increase enrollment, increase attendance. Those are all, that's the ripple effect. And of course, the long-term product is, of course, students into these workforce pipelines. So from an educator and as ed chair of the council, to me, it's how do we improve school culture? How do we use these resources and these kind of government operations to kind of just meet kids where they're at the school level, meet the needs of all of our kids, not just some of our children? And of course, I think the long-term benefits, as we hear in this call, speak for themselves. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And Sterling, I want to turn it to you to add to that.
Yes, I think Councilman Traeger is raising a point that we strive for every day when it comes to school culture, but it's also how do we ensure that every kid, regardless of who they are entitled to a quality education. But how do we achieve that? Here's the greatest thing that I know about CTE. CTE doesn't care about your learning style. There is a pathway for you, right? You see that through competitions with students with disabilities, whether you're doing Skills USA, there's a whole division on what you can do with students with disabilities, right? And like I say, I can say this publicly, teachers do an amazing job. But as a system, we all collectively have to do a better job at how we serve our most neediest children, right? Because you can literally, you may want to be a cybersecurity expert if that's what you want to do in CTE, in the IT space. But there's also a way where you can just install your triple play, right? There's all these gambits that, yes, it provides the furthest, if that's where you want to go, but it also provides young people with the opportunity at the end of the day to be able to take care of themselves and their family. And we have to recognize that it's not just going to we always shoot for the stars, but sometimes the kids just want to get to the sky, right? And we have to provide that opportunity for them as well.
I appreciate that. Roger, you want to add to that? Unmute there, Roger.
Yeah, I just want to kind of piggyback a little bit of what was being said in terms of the students with special needs. We have about 20% of our students who are students with special needs, and then in our building, because we're a campus school, we have a D75. And if there were enough funding for us to be able to bring in an additional teacher who is trained to work with students with disabilities. Because again, our D75 program in our building, we have students who are severely disabled, but not incapable of doing things. But the other thing is we need to train people to do that. Because I have chefs who are working for me who are industry professionals, this does not make them equipped and able to do that. So it's important for to have the funding to be able to train folks to know how to work with young people with disabilities. Because again, it's not something it's not OJT. You have got to learn the basics. You've got to be able to do that, and this cannot happen without funding. We've had conversations with the D75 principal time and time again. can we do something? Is there anything that we could possibly do? And unfortunately, we've always kind of come up to a solid wall because is in terms of programming, where do we, how do we program students? And then because we have a full program already, but again, if we had folks who were able to come in, trained professionals, teachers, chefs, industry folks, and to work with young people and to give them those opportunities, it would be ideal. It would be ideal, and it would be fair and equitable, And we've always said, it's a shame for us to have a facility that we do, but we can't do what would be a good thing for us to do, because again, we lack the funding, we lack the trained individuals to do that. So again, I just want to kind of mention, it goes back to funding, and like most all things do. But for us to be able to meet the needs of these young people, that has to happen, right? And like right now, the fair student funding barely covers my salaries. That's it. There is no money for anything else. I have to depend on other funding sources, which are few in terms of being able to do what I do. We do it. But again, if we had those additional funding, our fair share of fair student funding, maybe we could bring someone in to be able to do that and better serve our school community. And when I say our school community, I just don't mean food and finance. I mean, we're a campus school. And, we have young people upstairs who would definitely benefit from this. So again, I just want to kind of mention that in terms of, training and having the teachers who have the capacity to be able to do that and to do it well. So, again, I just want to kind of interject that.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate that. And I think this is a wonderful line of conversation here about, providing that equity and access to these types of programs. One of the things that I want to dive into now is, I think we'd be a little remiss if we didn't speak about some of the acute challenges that we're facing with the pandemic and its impact on our local economy, and particularly in how that changes how we prepare young people for jobs and careers. I'll just open this up and you guys can chime in, but what are some of the impacts that you guys are seeing on the local economy, and what implications do we see that having on CT programs and other types of training initiatives in this acute period?
Well, I'll take a stab at what we know to be the huge. We lobbied, we fight for a heroes package. One of the biggest hurdles that we know around this state right now that's impacting not just CTE but education as a whole, and that is going to be the funding, right? The budget deficit that is so massive that even with a stimulus, we still at a deficit, right? Folks are doing some of the most creative things that they can do. It's almost like we should move every school to 34th Street because that's the only place where miracles happen, right? It's an incredible thing that goes on. But in all seriousness, the budget is because of COVID is significant, and it has a significant impact. But we've been through tough budgets before, right? We've been through these times, but the way, based on the conversation that we're having, is that we have to make choices at this point, right? When we talk about funding, as much as they're important, it's really about what do we want to invest in that's going to give us a return on that investment. Those are the conversations that we have to have with everyone. We have to have that with our school leaders, our elected officials. We have to have it with parents. We have to have it in our communities. We have to figure out what are the priorities that we need to be investing in to be able to get through COVID. Not one single entity is going to have a magic bullet to solve this problem. This is a collective effort that's going to have multiple fronts. From our vantage point as the UFT, and you've heard our president say all the time, it's a collective, it's all of us working together. It's going to be difficult. We can't say that it won't, but I think that we can figure out ways, just like we figured out how to reopen schools when everyone thought it wasn't going to be possible. They figured that we couldn't go fully remote. Yes, there has been challenges, but we've done it, right? It requires us. And it doesn't mean there won't be some stumbling blocks, some hiccups, some disagreements, some things that we have to advocate for, things that we may miss that we have to refocus on. But I am confident that if we all, just like we're having this discussion, if we have the meaningful conversations with like-minded individuals, I think we can get through to some of it. But our elected officials, they can tell us regarding the budget, what's that look like?
Assemblywoman, you had your hand raised there. I'll let you have it.
I'm remote learning with my daughter, so that's why I was raising my hand. She's 10, so it's been very challenging. So, but I agree with everything that Sterling said. So, you know, if we're talking about, I thought about during this time how the students and teachers are doing because of COVID, and a lot of this we know being in labs or being hands-on is a huge part of CTE, and that's for some people not occurring. And how is that going remotely? And then when it comes to budget or money, I can tell you this. I know the last I heard in DC that Speaker Pelosi was talking to Mnuchin, and maybe there was a deal, and then McConnell said if they get something, they'll vote on it. But we've had so many misstarts that even when this comes down, it still doesn't mean that New York gets what New York wants. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have an election November 3rd. That will change a lot. If it's Biden, it's one way. If it's Trump, it's another way. And even after that, as a legislator, we have not been called back to session. We were released at the call of the speaker. So if a stimulus passes, going back now a week before election when a lot of my colleagues have contested races, I'm not sure how that works. I think we'll go back after the election because we have to decide what's going to happen to that money. And also in our last budget, we didn't have revenue streams. So that's the third thing that's, you know, we're working against a really tough clock here when it comes to New York State, and not just for education, for a lot of non-for-profits. And I could go on and on. The list is very long about what the needs are here. But when I think primarily about students, my heart goes there first, and wondering how we all cope. Teachers are under great strain now, especially, you know, I'm blessed that we have the same teacher she had for fourth grade, and now she has in fifth grade. And I'm thinking about all of the students who for a lot of them, being in the classroom is a joy, not just for teachers, but for the kids too. And especially for our CTE population, how are they dealing during this time? I can only imagine of the challenges that a lot of our students and teachers and administration are going through, but hopefully no one is alone in this, and that we're all, like Sterling said, we can do this together. And we have seen hard times before. This is exceptional, but I know we can get through this too.
And if I could add to the Assembly members' remarks, you know, this past city budget was very, very challenging. And we heard Principal Turjan mention how he barely makes ends meet with the fair student funding that he has. You know, the mayor had wanted to advance a $100 million cut to fair student funding, and we had to fight like hell to reverse that cut, and we were able to, but it was still a very painful budget because the city's at the bottom of the budgetary food chain, and New York State faces a similar dynamic because the federal government, as mentioned, has not given New York its fair share. But I want to just kind of give a historical perspective. I mentioned before about, you know, schools in my district built with money from the New Deal. That should give us some perspective. When we had not just the pandemic, we had a major unemployment crisis. We had an economic crisis. History shows us that in response to the Great Depression, and once we had a new administration, FDR advanced significant funding to cities, to states, to build schools, to build hospitals, to build infrastructure. There was a lot of investment in how to help unemployed Americans find additional jobs and skills and workforce training to get them back into the workforce. I also want to share that when I ask my students, when I ask schools in my community questions about their future, I don't just pose the question, well, what do you want to be in the future? I ask them, what kinds of problems would you like to solve? And so in my district, for example, in Coney Island, we have a food desert. We have a lack of access to fresh fruit and fruits and vegetables and fresh produce. And we are a very hard-hit community by COVID-19. We have the 5th highest death rate per capita in the city of New York. We have many essential workers, working families. We have many seniors, people with disabilities. And for years, I've been trying to get an organization to see if they could open up like a farmer's market or to help increase access. They said that they don't have capacity. So here's what I'm doing. I am partnering with Rachel Carson High School and in my district, and we are building a state-of-the-art greenhouse farm, urban farm, where students will be growing fresh vegetables and fruits from seed to table, and they're going to be increasing access to fresh produce in our community. Kids will be a part of the answer. Kids will be a part of the solution. That those are lifelong skills, those are career skills, and they're actually helping solve a community problem. And we'll be partnering with community organizations to increase access after school hours and on the weekends. Lastly, we hear a lot about the crisis of our time, climate change as well, and a lot of plans and programs about how we need to invest in solar panels and a lot of renewable energy. And my question always is, well, who's going to build it? Who's going to maintain it and sustain it? And so I believe that we need to invest in our schools to be the pipeline for now and for the future. Kids who live in flood zones, kids who have experienced Superstorm Sandy, like in my district, they should not just be witnesses to the recovery. They should be active participants in the recovery and the building up of the resiliency of their neighborhoods and cities. So we need to get our kids involved in helping solve the problems and challenges of our time while developing lifelong skills and entering the 21st century workforce.
I really appreciate that perspective. And Jack, I'm going to get to you because I think he teed up something really nice for you to speak on here. I think this resiliency piece is so important. And with the last few minutes we have on our discussion tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about opportunity and the forward-looking things. What are the things that we can do? I know that from an intermediary perspective, one of the things that we do is we're working with schools to provide students with that resiliency, the entrepreneurial mindset. How do we create and solve the problems that we're facing, not what's the job we're going to get? So we're getting our students to think about that. I know there's some questions about other CTE models, middle school. One of the things that we're doing is offering career exploration in middle schools now so we can expose students to these types of things. Jack, I know one of the conversations you and I have had a lot is about the future of work and what happens and how this is changing. I mean, in many senses, this has sped up the future of work and we're now in it. So if I could start with you and then maybe we'll go around for everyone's last thought. What are you looking forward to? What are the things that we need to think about? What are the things that we can do as a community here to promote this forward?
Sure, Councilman Traeger makes some great points at grassroots level. The carnage of COVID will be gone. The hard part will be gone in a year or 2 or 3 or whatever it's going to be. But the impact on New York City is going to be dramatic. The people who left may not come back. The businesses that have gone out of business may not come back. But that means that a lot of new businesses will come back. That we're having overall in the U.S., we're having the highest rate of new business startups ever. So it's kind of a cleansing moment in a horrible way that we've got an opportunity for our CTE kids with employable skills to go out in this area where we're rebuilding New York to be able to make those kind of connections. I think all of our industry partners, I think Roger was talking about some of the restaurants who are working with the kids through the tough times. The people in emergency services. I know there was one of the schools I saw recently, one of the CTE schools, I think it was Clara Barton, had the kids doing COVID tracing and learning how to do coronavirus backup and tracing and so on. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity because there aren't going to be a lot of people who've been in those jobs for 100 years because those jobs are moving away and things are changing. Separately from that, as we've been talking about, Nick, for a long time, the future of work is the future of the gig economy, which I'm a big skeptic about, a platform economy, a more entrepreneurial economy, which fits into the virtual enterprises focus. We've got to get kids not wanting to get a cubicle at Nomura Securities for their first job, but we want kids who want to be able to figure out how to start their own clothing line or music business or falafel joint. There's a lot of places where this kind of a horrible disaster that's befallen the city has the promise of a lot of new opportunities and new green shoots and leaves where our kids especially, because they know how to do things and they know how to get work done, are well set up to be able to thrive, I think. So I'm a glass half full kind of guy, but it seems to me that we're going to have horrible budgets of the next 5 years in New York. There's going to be no money for this and that, allegedly, from the people who do the money. But there's going to be a lot of places in the pavement where we'll be able, cracks in the pavement where we'll be able to start some new life, I think.
I appreciate that. And with our last few minutes, we are going to take a glass half full approach to this. And I will go around to the other panelists. And in about 30 seconds or so, if you can give us what you think is the biggest opportunity that we have in front of us, or the one thing that people listening can do to support the cause. So Harini, from the Department of Education perspective, I'm going to give it to you first. Biggest opportunity or things that we can do?
Biggest opportunity and things that we could do, invest in work-based learning, not just for CTE students, but for all our high school students. And a unit of career and financial management for all students, all high school students, not just CTE students.
I love it. Thank you. So get that career and financial management and work-based learning, get them in the job. Sterling, from your perspective, biggest opportunity, thing that we can do?
Well, what I would say is that I am optimistic. From our conversation in creating a sector-based approach, I heard teachers talking about how they engage their kids in social issues in the hospitality and culinary space, where teachers were talking about how they talked about food deserts and kids were matched with chefs to be able to give feedback. In addition to that, how they also dealt with climate change and how climate change impacts on food. So although they were struggling as it relates to some of the CTE deliverables, I am optimistic that the educators are doing some innovative work in their schools and the conversations are robust even in these challenging times. So a big up to the educators.
Awesome. Wonderful. Roger, what are you excited about?
Well, I see it as, I was really excited to hear Mark talk about, what they were doing in Coney Island in terms of the food desert. And it's really exciting. And actually, I'm going to have to talk to him about that because I think, urban agriculture is something that we really have to start looking at. And, we talked about preparing food, teaching our students how to prepare food and, how to serve it and how, what hospitality looks like. We're going to have to retool them in some of these aspects because, again, the industry is changing dramatically. But I really have this, this inner thing of my own that, urban agriculture is really, really important. And to be able to take, to grow it, to prepare it, and to serve it, and to be able to serve the community, and to be more dependent on ourselves and our environment. So, I really love what he had to say. And again, like I said, I'm going to have to, kind of reach out on that because I totally agree with him on that. But again, it's part of our industry. It's retooling, it's rethinking, and it's you working with the industry to do that.
Love it. Assemblywoman, what can we do? How do we help this situation? Oh, you're on mute.
In listening to everyone tonight, and especially the last parts what Councilman Trey was talking about, I think we have to be innovative with our legislation, as we have had to be innovative with COVID, in that everyone is learning how to work and learn differently. And this is a model that is going to continue even as we recover, and being able to source and source, I think is instrumental in how we approach legislation moving forward. I'll give you an example. I don't know if we'll be going back to Albany. We will probably be doing everything virtually. That has made us think differently in the legislation that we are creating for our next session. So, and it goes with education. What do we need to do collectively so that we are innovative with our legislation moving forward. And it takes all of us to make that happen. My name may go on the bill, but it's really the creation of my community and my constituents that really move it forward. And I'm excited moving forward, especially for our young people working and learning in this environment. They have become very, very creative. And the gig economy is where it is. No one is getting 25, 30-year jobs anymore. It is about how you market yourself and move yourself. And I'm a strong believer that with CTE education, that is the wave of the future for our children.
Thank you so much. And Councilman, you get the last word here.
Thank you. Oh, thanks for everyone again for this very powerhouse presentation and panel. I believe that when you're in adversity, there's opportunity. And there's no turning back to what the school system was. When folks keep asking me, when do we go back to that? No, we had pre-existing conditions plaguing our school system that inhibit our ability to really fully reopen right now. We need to move forward. Think about the number of kids and families saying, I want to go to school. Think about the deep, enriching conversations we're having now about internet capacity, bandwidth, remote learning, technology, devices, 21st century learning. We need to account for the social emotional needs of our kids, the trauma which they're feeling. We need to have a forward-thinking vision. And I truly believe we need to be asking ourselves, how do we work with our school communities to help solve the challenges and problems of our time? I think in that you will have deep, rich learning, you will have work-based learning, and a multitude of career options for our children. Think about the role of schools during this challenge. They might be remote learning, but schools are still physically open in many cases, feeding families. They are centers, community hub centers. So I see opportunities that we need to kind of move forward, have a 21st century or 22nd century vision for our school communities to help really solve the challenges of our time. So I want to be optimistic. We're going to get through this, and there's no turning back, only moving forward.
I appreciate it. And I want to thank all of our panelists here this evening, Councilman Traeger, Assemblywoman Heineman, Principal Turjan, Harini Venkatesh, Sterling Roberson, Jack Powers. It has been a tremendous honor to lead this panel with all of you and have such a vivid and lively discussion. Thank you to all of you. And thank you so much to the New York City Bar Association for giving us the vehicle to have this conversation. Thank you to Pat Heck and others and all the others. Leslie, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. I believe that there's going to be a recording of this available, and we'll see you on the other side out there doing it for our students. So thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you all. It's been a pleasure.